Almost there. Technology letting us do more, but still being frustrating.
Hi, Rabbi. How are you?
Doing fine, Nathaniel.
Hola, Jose. I like today your comment that we today treat God as our best buddy from upstairs. That was funny.
It's very true. You know, it's something that I'm always surprised at the casualness that people want the relationship. Intimacy, yes, but not casualness.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Nathan.
Buenas y Santa José. ¿Cómo andan los dos?
Bien, bien, gracias.
¿Al final se compró alguno de los libros que le recomendé?
Pero lo voy a pedir a Israel, a Bracelet, porque es muy interesante.
¿Se acuerda que le mandé por el... sorry, Rabbi, we are talking about the book.
Sí, yo lo voy a mandar a pedir, porque no sé dónde conseguirlo aquí.
Pero yo le mandé a ustedes el website.
Oh, no, por ese website es que lo voy a pedir.
Ah, sí, perfecto. Si yo le compré a alguien, también a un amigo que no lee mucho inglés, le compré la Gadá de Pesach de Rabbi Isaac. Pero esos 3 libros que les dije son buenos, son una
Muy
buena
bueno.
base. Y son en español, así que aprovechen.
Ok, gracias.
I understood enough of that about a book from Rabbi Sachs and Pesach.
Yeah, remember, Rabbi, when I published in the WhatsApp group that now Coren has a few books in Spanish?
Yes, yes.
So Jose asked me which one I recommend for him. So I recommended him 3.
Right.
So I was asking him if he already ordered it or not.
Well, you know, the talking of learning is always part of our class, so that's fine.
Oh, yes. No, I was buying too many books in the last year. Did you receive the book at the end?
No, not yet. It still hasn't come.
My God.
I know. I ordered directly because it was, you know, better for supporting the organization than giving Amazon their cut.
True.
And it's taking forever to get here. I mean, it's not that I don't have enough to read, but still.
Yeah, happened. I bought also from Koren, one from the Rabbi Soloveitchik, a new one that they published with a few articles that they found lately.
Okay.
And they didn't show in any book, so I'm still waiting.
So
they're very bad.
But I mean, I've got a stack of books that I'm still working my way through. So it's not like I'm dying for new material, but I was looking forward to that one, and you know, it'll come when it comes.
Oh, you will like it. And actually, you know what? I don't know if you read him or follow him very often, but most of the stuff that sometimes we have a conversation through Daf Yomi, it's exactly his position in the book.
Well, that's not accidental. I've read most of his other books, and I read most of his articles, and I agree with him on a great many topics.
So that's why, because many of the examples, many of the comments that you gave me, for example, remember about can we trust the Chazal if they don't know about astronomy with the rest?
Right.
Did, and he answered exactly that with your comment.
Well, you may remember that when we were on that daf talking about the orbit of the Earth or the sun and all of that, I sent a link to the whole group about his essay on that topic.
True.
Because he's really been a pioneer of trying to answer that question for the modern world. You know, it's a rabbi who only wanted to talk about animals and their place in Judaism. Ended up having to really cover a lot more territory than he ever intended.
Yeah, but I don't know how much you read from him, but let me tell you, he doesn't like conservative and reforms.
Oh, I know. No, like I said, I don't agree with him on every point. No, of course not.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have expected him to. And, you know, there's some of his other comments on Israeli politics that I don't agree with him on. Some yes, some no, but that's the thing. I shouldn't need to agree with a person 100% to still be able to learn from them, and that's very important.
But it's funny because in some way he writes, oh, we need to be flexible to accept other opinions in Judaism. However, they need to be people that they accept and keep the halacha system, and not like the conservative and reform movement that they try to change. Okay, so he was very clear that yes, be open-minded, but not too much.
Right. Well, once the book comes and I've had a chance to read it, we can discuss it in more detail.
No problem. No problem.
All right. So let's pick up the Mishnah, which is a good book to study as well. Not quite edited up to modern standards, because of course it had a very different goal in mind, as we've talked about in the past, but still a very important book to read, and one that has much for us to learn from. And last week we left off having read the first Mishnah of chapter 9 in Yevamot, which talked about women who are permitted to their husbands, but are forbidden to their Yevamim, meaning to the brother-in-law that they would be asked to marry in the case their husband died while they were childless. Now, in Mishnah 2, we are going to see the opposite case, which is these are the cases of women who are permitted to their Yevamim, the brother-in-law, and forbidden to their husbands. So these are the category of women who technically should not be in the relationship with their husband, but when their husband dies, they would be permitted to be married to the Yavam, to the brother-in-law. For example, there is the case of a high priest who betroths a widow, which is not allowed, and he has a brother who is a common priest, whom she is permitted to marry. Now, very important, notice the word betrothed. We're going to see later on that if they got married, it's a different situation. But in this case, we're talking about just the betrothal. This is true, as it says, sorry, I should have continued reading the commentary. I often prepare with a different text, so I don't always know what they're going to put in their commentary. This is true only if the high...
Which text do you prepare the classes?
You mean for the English?
Yeah, for us, for this class, when you prepare for us.
Well, when I'm reading through on my own, I tend to prefer, I prefer to read the Hebrew directly. And then when I look for a translation, I like to use the USCJ translation because I think it has very clear English. But I forget sometimes that this translation, the primary one in Sefaria, has all of the additional explanatory notes. So sometimes I begin to explain and I don't realize that they were about to include that inside the text rather than outside of it.
Okay.
So this is true only if the high priest merely betrothed her. However, if he consummated the marriage, they had sex, he rendered her a halalah, which means that she is now forbidden to all priests, including her yavam, the brother-in-law, since he is a kohen. The additional cases are a priest fit, meaning who is kasher for service, who married a halalah, and he has a brother who is a halal. So just a reminder of these cases, right? The first husband is a kosher priest in every respect, meaning he is able to serve at the altar of Jerusalem. And he married a woman who is a halalah, which is a woman that has engaged in an intercourse that is considered to be outside the realm of permissible, especially for the Kohanim. For example, if she married a Kohen that she was not allowed to marry, the widow being the example from the previous part. So he's married to her. That is considered to be a marriage. It does mean that he is now no longer able to officiate in the temple, but their marriage is a marriage. He dies, and he has a brother who is the offspring of a union like this. That makes that brother a halalah, or halal rather, and that means that she could get married to the brother because he is not held to the same standard because he was never going to be officiating at the altar. So she shouldn't be married to the husband, but she can be married to the brother-in-law. Third category, an Israelite of unflawed lineage, meaning somebody who is not a mamzer, who married a mamzeret, and he has a brother who is a mamzer. Remember, you can have a half-brother, one who is of perfectly fine lineage, the other who is a mamzer, meaning he is born from a forbidden relationship, think incest or adultery. So the one brother is married to a mamzeret. He's married to a woman who came from such a union, which is not allowed. But he has a half-brother by the father's side who is also a mamzer. That brother is allowed to marry a mamzeret, but the first brother, the husband who died, was not supposed to marry a mamzeret. So she was forbidden from the first husband, but she is technically permitted to the brother-in-law.
Rabbi,
yes, go ahead.
would the offspring then be mamzer or non-mamzer? It'd be a mamzer because it's from the forbidden union of even though it's from the priest, the non-mamzer's child, it would still be mamzer because it's with a mamzer female, right?
Exactly. The category of being a mamzer and the offspring of the mamzer is a permanent line of mamzerim. It is one of the more difficult parts of Torah to square with how we normally treat people. And it is one of the reasons why, as we've talked before, the rabbis went out of their way to try and avoid increasing the number of mamzerim in the community. They always tried to find as many extenuating circumstances as they could.
But Rabbi, when you said it's a continuing lineage, I thought you meant it's continuing from the father, right? Because a convert can marry a mamzeret, and then the offspring would not be a mamzer because it goes by the father, though, right?
I would have to double check that particular situation.
Oh, I thought this was just a mamzer because it's technically the son of a non-mamzer and a mamzer female, which he was permitted to. But I wasn't sure on that reasoning there.
Well, as we'll see in the next category, if we reverse the genders, we still have an issue, right? A mamzer who married an Israelite woman, meaning the brother who's deceased was a mamzer, but the Israelite woman, if it's his wife, was not. Again, she should not be married to him, but for whatever reason they are. And he, the deceased brother who was a mamzer, who is similarly an Israelite of unflawed lineage, he would be allowed to do yibum, to do the levirate marriage for the Israelite woman. His status would remain fine. Okay, so all of these women are permitted to their Yevamim and forbidden to their husbands. So that's a bookend summary of our beginning line. These are women who are okay with the brother-in-law, but shouldn't have been with their husband in the first place. And these are the cases where women are forbidden to these and to those, meaning they shouldn't be with the brother and they shouldn't be with the brother-in-law, or shouldn't be with the husband nor the brother-in-law. A high priest who married a widow, again, married a widow, and he has a brother who is a high priest or a common priest. As we mentioned before, once they consummated it, she is now a halalah and therefore not allowed to marry any other priest. A priest fit for service who married a halalah, and he has a brother who is a priest fit for service. An Israelite of unflawed lineage who married a mamzeret, and he has a brother who is similarly an ordinary Israelite. Or a mamzer who married an Israelite woman of unflawed lineage, and he has a brother who is a mamzer. All of these women are forbidden to these and to those. So in those cases, you wouldn't do yibum, and they shouldn't have been married to the person they were married to in the first place. And all other women are permitted to their husbands and to their Yevamim. Now, the Talmud is quick to point out that this final sentence is not actually all, that there are some other rare exceptions where it might still be a problem, but it is trying to give you the parameters around which you should think and categorize who should be married to whom. Okay, questions, comments?
But I got one comment though.
Yes.
I remember you said we talked about how it didn't make a difference, it was forbidden. But the children of these, they take the status of the father, right?
So they would take the status of the father in some ways and the status of the mother in others, as we've talked about. There are different categories. So like, for example, in the case of a priest who married a halalah, a woman that he shouldn't have married, the children would still be considered to be Kohanim, but they are now considered to be halal, which means they are not fit Kohanim. So their status is partly due to their father and partly due to the result of their father's union with the mother that should not have been married into the priesthood.
But they still receive the truma. They still eat truma.
Yes.
Okay. But for marriage, they don't consider them 100% Kohanim.
Exactly.
Okay.
And this is part of the exceptional rules that happen to be applied to the Kohanim. And yes, it put them in often a more limited pool of who they were available to marry.
And Rabbi, is the reason they take you said they take on the status of the mother in some extent, are they literally taking on a status of the mother, or are they taking on the status of some kind of impermissible relationship?
Right, they're taking on the status that is the result of the mother status.
But is it connected to the mother, or is it connected to the relationship that you shouldn't have had?
Well, that's, yes, both, right? The relationship is contingent upon the mother status, and the status that is being conveyed on the child is the result of the mother status causing the problem in the relationship. So I'm not quite sure how to separate those two. You can't be born from a mother without the relationship, and the relationship's not problematic without the mother. So if you can differentiate between those two and to another degree, maybe I can understand more what you're asking.
No, I was just wondering about it for the general principles on whether or not, because the general rule is you take the lineage of the father. So I was just wondering if they were deviating here, or if there was a different reason for.
No, I wouldn't call that a deviation. I mean, they are taking on a status that was contingent upon the mother status, but the relationship takes two to tango, as they say. Mm-hmm. So they are the result of A plus B, or rather, halal plus kohen. So it's probably not worth it to say that one is more important than the other, but certainly the mother status is what was added to the mix that otherwise would not have rendered the child halal. The father on his own would not have resulted in that situation.
Yeah, but it took an impermissible act on the father to have that relationship, though, right?
It did. Like I said, two to tango. That's how babies are made. Mishnah 3. With regard to secondary relatives, right? Now, secondaries are the ones that are forbidden by rabbinic law. So the secondary relatives, for example, and I made sure to make notes of this, are, for example, the mother's mother, the father's mothers, the son's daughter-in-law, his daughter's daughter-in-law, his son's daughter's daughter, his son's son's daughter, his daughter's daughter's daughter. These are the second layers of impermissible that were not spelled out in the Torah, but that the rabbis added as an additional precaution.
Mother, mother, father, father, son, son.
If you would like more of this, if you go to Mishnah Torah and you go to Hilchot Ishut, this is like in the first chapter. It's in the paragraph 6 of Mishnah Torah Hilchot Ishut. So that will give you the full late rundown of the secondary relatives that are forbidden by rabbinic law rather than by Torah law. So with regards to the secondary relatives, if the woman is a secondary relative to the husband, but not a secondary relative to the Yavam, she is forbidden to the husband and permitted to the Yavam, as you might understand. Again, she shouldn't have been married to the husband, but she is allowed to be married to the Yavam. Conversely, if she is a secondary relative to the Yavam, but not a secondary relative to the husband, she is forbidden to the Yavam and permitted to the husband. So it could be the opposite. If she is a secondary relative both to this man and to that man, which would not be unusual, she is forbidden to this one and to that one. So the layout is fairly logical and it's very much what we just saw in Mishnah 2. Furthermore, if a man marries a woman forbidden to him as a secondary relative, she does not have the right to receive payment for her marriage contract, the ketubah, if divorced or widowed, nor is she entitled to payment from her husband for the produce of her property that is used, nor is she entitled to provisions of her sustenance from his estate, nor does she get back worn clothes or other objects she brought with her to marriage. Okay, so, hold on. And the lineage of the offspring is unflawed, and the court forces him to divorce her. So, because they violated the rabbinic law and created this marriage that they should not have created, that means that the other aspects of rabbinic law that go along with the marriage are null and void, in particular the ketubah and the other types of protections. However, the lineage is still considered unflawed. This does not create a problem for the children that were born from that union. However, they are not allowed to continue to remain married. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yeah, Rob, I have a question.
Yes.
But then she forfeits what she brought into the marriage, right?
No. She doesn't forfeit what she brought into it. She forfeits the English word depreciation. So, that's what it means by the produce that of her property that was used. So if he used X amount, normally if there was a divorce, she would be compensated for whatever loss he had incurred on her property. We've talked about this before, sometimes a bit more generally, that the things that he is allowed to use, he is also liable to maintain their value.
So usually he'd be liable for the principal. You're talking about he essentially dipped into the principal.
Exactly. He has dipped into it, and normally he would have to make that good. In this particular case, he does not. Excuse me. Similarly, normally when providing for her sustenance, if he were to die, that would come from his estate. In this case, it would not. So it's not saying that she is being robbed. It's saying that she doesn't get the additional protections that would normally go along with a rabbinically sanctioned marriage. Does that make sense?
Yes, Rabbi. Why does the marriage fail again, though? Because just because it's in violation of rabbinic law and it's something they should not do?
Yep, that's exactly right.
All right.
Okay, and then the second half of this Mishnah gives us a contrast. In contrast, a widow married to a high priest, a divorcee or Yevamot who performed chalitza married to a common priest. Remember, that counts as though you were a divorcee. A mamzeret or a Gibeonite woman, again, the netinah wasn't a very common case, but it was there, married to an Israelite of unflawed lineage, or an Israelite woman of unflawed lineage, married to a Gibeonite or to a mamzer, all have the right to receive payment from their marriage contract, although it was prohibited for them to marry. So the general rule that I've seen about why they would get their ketubah and their right as well as the other is because the Torah laws did not require additional support. This is sort of a general rule that we see in a few places in rabbinic discussion, which is to say that people were more likely to obey a Torah prohibition than they were to obey a rabbinic prohibition. And that meant that occasionally the rabbis would create a special penalty for violating the rabbinic prohibition in order to force people to take it more seriously. Does that make sense? I'm not asking whether or not you agree with the idea. I just want to make sure that you understand the logic behind it. Right? You need to create this additional barrier to transgression because people are not as careful about it on their own. It'd be kind of like if you were at the Grand Canyon, although technically I know they probably put up guardrails now, you're at the Grand Canyon, almost everybody's going to stay way away from the edge of the canyon because, that's a canyon and no one wants to fall into that and die. On the other hand, if you are, making a patio in your backyard and there's a 4-foot drop, you are almost guaranteed to put up a rail around that patio, more than you would be at the Grand Canyon. Why? Because for the Grand Canyon, its danger speaks for itself. It is already shouting at people, don't come too close. And so too the Torah is shouting to people, don't violate me. The Torah has been very explicit about that. But the rabbis, well, I don't know if you've ever noticed, not everybody pays attention to what the rabbis teach. And so the rabbis felt it necessary to put up a barrier, an extra warning sign, an extra danger, to try and dissuade people from going ahead and having these relationships anyway. And one of the ways that they did that was by the changes to these protections. Questions or comments? Okay, then we move on to number 4. If there is an Israelite woman betrothed to a priest or pregnant from a priest, and he died, and a widow awaiting her yavam, who is a priest, and similarly the daughter of a priest who is betrothed, pregnant from, or is a widow waiting for her yavam, who is an Israelite, she may not partake of truma. All right, so let's make sure we got this because it's a little confusing. Let's make sure that we get this clear here. All right, we have this Israelite woman, and she is engaged to marry a priest, or she is pregnant from the priest and he died. In those cases, right, she is not allowed to eat truma. While actually married to him, or as we'll see, actually with one of his living children, she is. But in this case, he died either before the wedding was completed or before the child was born. So she is not able to eat from the truma. Likewise, a widow who is waiting for her yavam, even though that yavam is a priest, she is not allowed to eat from the truma yet until they finalize the arrangement. And similarly, the daughter of a priest who is betrothed, pregnant from, or is a widow awaiting for her yavam may not partake of truma. Now, why in that case? Because she is still connected to the Israelite. And a daughter of a priest would normally be allowed to eat truma from her father's household, but not if she is betrothed, pregnant from, or is a widow awaiting for the yavam from an Israelite. In fact, you might say that the truma is being held away in both cases. You might have thought that it would be perfectly parallel, meaning that if I am not attached to the priest in the first half and can't get to the truma, then in the second half, I shouldn't be considered attached to the Israelite, and I should be allowed to have truma from my father's household. However, that is not the case. The status of the truma is withheld until that status is finalized, is clarified. And indeed, we saw this all the way back in chapter 7, where you could have the unborn influence what was going on in a way that would that could disqualify, but could not actually qualify. It could keep you from, but not give you right to. And so this is just another continuation of that. But we're going to see there's a little bit more to go. But I want to make sure we get that first half down because it's in typical Mishnah language, very shorthand. And I want to make sure you got that full explanation.
Rob, I had a question.
Mm-hmm.
How come it connects the betrothal to a pregnant in the same sentence? It says betrothed or pregnant, making them seem that there's a similarity between being betrothed and being pregnant.
Well, there is, in the sense that they are both temporary statuses that will eventually be resolved in the normal course of time with a finalization of that relationship. When you are betrothed, you will eventually be expected to get married, and then we know that she'll be allowed to eat. When she is pregnant, and he dies, we know that when the child is born, she'll be allowed to eat because she'll be reconnected through the born child. So they are very similar in that respect. They are temporary, there is a temporary status that we are expecting to be resolved. But while that status is temporary, it does keep her away from the truma.
So is this essentially saying that a woman's status to her, I'll use the word fiance, is similar to a woman's status to the fetus in becoming the child?
This is saying that with regards to eating truma, the woman's current status is more important than her eventual status. And her current status is she is not married, she is not the mother of a priest, nor has she remarried the Yavam. So her current status is what's important, not her eventual status. That's what this list is trying to tell us. And likewise, we are being given a slightly different version for the Israelite woman, because again, the eating of truma is very restricted. And the text wants to limit the number of people who can. Who can. Let's continue with the Levite. Very different than the Levirate. Right? Levirate is the English term for Yibum, for the marriage of the brother-in-law. Levite is one of the Levites, one of the people who came from the tribe of Levite. If there is an Israelite woman betrothed to a Levite or pregnant from a Levite, and a widow awaiting her Yavam who is a Levite, and similarly, the daughter of a Levite who is betrothed, pregnant from, or a widow waiting for her Yavam who is an Israelite, she may not partake of tithes. The special tithes that were given to the Levites were restricted in the same way that Truma was restricted for the Kohanim. And just as we saw for the first half, so too does it apply with regards to a Levite. If there is a daughter of a Levite betrothed to a priest, to a Kohen, or pregnant from a priest, and a widow awaiting her Yavam, who is a priest, and similarly the daughter of a priest who is betrothed to or pregnant from a Levite, or is a widow waiting for her Yavam, who is a Levite, she may partake of neither Truma nor tithes. Right? This is literally the worst of both worlds in that final category. She is not considered to be a Levite for the purposes of the tithes, and she is not considered yet a Kohen for the purposes of Truma, or vice versa, if they are being married from one to the other. Questions or comments? All right. Just a reminder that in general, the Mishnah, and as the Gemara explains, is very worried about giving familiar access to either the tithing or the truma for people that should not have familiar access. Even if there might be some reasons to think that they could, it is better to keep it clear, if you will.
Hey, Rabbi, I had a question on that, actually.
Yes.
When you talk about access to the tithing, that just means you can't give it to that person, right? The priest can give it to whoever they want after they receive it, though, right?
Well, for the tithing.
Yes.
Well, so there were different tithes. So there were some tithes that were only to be eaten by the Levites themselves, and then there were other tithes, yes, that were freely exchangeable for goods and services, if you will. So yes, this is talking about the tithe that was limited only for the Levites to eat.
And was that tithe? The name's Masorah, the 1/10. Is that there's two separate versions of the 1/10 that were given to the priest or the Levites?
Well, there's Maser Rishon and Maser Sheni are the two main Masers that are here. Now, I should point out that I didn't necessarily plan to go down this rabbit hole, but there is the opinion in the Talmud that this, let me back up because I want to get it on the screen again. there is an opinion, the dominant opinion in the Talmud, that this opinion in the Mishnah is actually derived from Rabbi Meir's opinion. And in fact, the rabbis as a whole disagree, and this is where it gets more confusing, and say the opposite of this, that in fact, non-Levites can eat from the tithe that is given to the Levites if the Levites wish to share it. So yes, this is where it gets difficult to take the eventual halachic discussion from the Talmud and map it one-to-one onto the Mishnah without redoing the Talmud's work. And since this is a Mishnah class rather than the Talmud class, I try to avoid doing that too often. But as I can see that your knowledge of tithing in general is causing conflict with what you see in the Mishnah, yes, that's because eventually the way the Talmud resolves this is to say, this is not meant to be understood the way you think, because this is the opinion of a minority rabbi.
Right.
But I'm happy to share if it clears that up. Okay, we are on Mishnah 5 from chapter 9. An Israelite woman married to a priest may partake of truma. That is obvious, right? That is what we know from day one. If the priest died and she had a child from him, she may continue to partake of truma. Wow, wouldn't it have been handy if this Mishnah had come all the way back in like chapter 7 when we were talking about this issue the first time? And again, as I have said 100 times at least, and now it's 101, the Mishnah assumes that you know every other part of the Mishnah and that you're only looking at this to refresh your memory. So yes, this is why the Mishnah is not written in order. If you want things to be read in order, go read Rambam. That was one of his main jobs, was to take this and put everything in order. So this would have been handy. Thankfully, I mentioned it to you back then, but now we're going to see it in more detail in its own section. If she subsequently married a Levite, meaning, so we're in the order of life here. She was an Israelite woman. She married a Kohen. He dies, but they have a child, so she can keep eating truma because the child anchors her into the realm of the Kohanim. If she remarries now, and this time it's to a Levite, she may no longer partake of truma, but she may partake of the first tithe on his account. So her status shifts to her new husband, even though she has a son or a child that is still anchored in the Kohanim. She is now considered part of the Levite group, and so she can eat the tithe from the Levite, again, according to Rabbi Meir, but all agree she can't eat the truma. If he too died, very unlucky, so she's now gone through a Kohen and a Levite, and she had a child from him, she may continue to partake of the tithe on account of the child. Again, the child, the most recent one, anchors her to the Levite clan. If she then married an Israelite, she may partake of neither truma nor tithe. Right? She is not allowed to have the truma based off the first child because this third husband anchors her there, nor is she allowed to have the tithing based off the second child because the third husband anchors her here in the Israelite group. If her Israelite husband died, third death, and she had children from him, she still may partake of neither truma nor tithe. She is still locked in the Israelite group. If her child from an Israelite also died, while her son from the Levite remained alive, then she reverts. She may partake of the tithe on account of the Levite child. If her child from the Levite died, leaving her with a son from the priest, the Kohen, that first one, she may once again partake of truma. If her child from the priest died as well, she may no longer partake of either truma or tithe, as she is now no longer connected to any of her husbands or children, because this is a woman who has had far too many tragedies. But let's just understand this is a hypothetical situation that the rabbis are simply using to clarify that the identity, the status vis-a-vis the truma and kohanim is linked according to both who the husband is as well as any children born that are still living. Questions or comments? All right, so it's fairly straightforward. Now, it may seem a little not modern, old-fashioned, if you will, to say that her status is linked to her husband and her children so tightly. And I need to just make a few clarifying remarks on that. So the status here is not the status like her rank in the society status. This is not that she is somehow considered to be merely an extension of her husband. Some communities maybe, yes, that's how they acted, but that's not what this is trying to teach. What this is trying to teach is that there are certain property rights that were associated with certain clans. And those property rights matter. This is about money more than it is about status. And if you were to take a modern example of a woman that was married to one man, and they had children together, and that man had won the lottery in his name for whatever reason, let's say before they got married, as long as they were married, we would expect that she would have access to his bank account in whatever arrangement they had. And when he died, if there was a child, you would expect that she would be allowed to continue to have access on as benefiting her and the child. On the other hand, if they died without any children, we would not necessarily be startled if it turned out that in his will, he did not leave all of his winnings to her. Yes, nowadays it's very common for the wife to inherit from the husband, but it could also happen that the money that he won from the lottery before meeting her, he had decided that he was going to donate to a charity or donate to his brother or someone else, that she would not have a claim to his property that came pre-existing to their relationship. Likewise, if there was money that was set aside for the benefit of the child, and while the child was growing, she had access to it, if she remarried, again, it wouldn't be surprising if there was a stipulation in the will, or at the very least in our own gut instinct, that the new husband should not expect that she's going to be able to keep dipping into that lottery fortune, that she would not be expected to have access to that. The son, sure, right? The son from the first husband, absolutely. He can still get the lottery winnings, but the wife, after remarrying, she would not be expected to have access to it. And that would bounce back and forth. If the new husband died and she had no children, then it might be normal for her to go back to the son from the first husband to have access to that account again. That might be all stipulated in a will, and we might be very comfortable with that idea. The truma and the tithing here are like the lottery winnings of the Kohanic and the Levite families. This precedes the relationship with the wife. This is something that will last much longer than her role within that family, and therefore she only has access to it conditionally. It's not a question of her status, it's just a question of who gets to touch the family fortune when somebody is marrying into and out of the family. Questions or comments?
So if she keep widow for ever and ever, she will receive the truma and all the benefits from a former Levi.
If she stays a widow,
yeah,
and she still has a living child, then yes, she will retain the benefits.
Doesn't matter if the living child is no more a child, is already an adult.
Oh yeah, children are children.
Oh, okay, could be children 40 years. That's okay.
Right, which is why, again, I think it was back in chapter 7, maybe, or maybe 8, with the grandmother who was lamenting that her grandchild disqualified her from having truma. Right, it is certainly possible for multi-generations to be affected by this chain. It's not only when they are, tiny children. Even the children of the previous generation can still impact the grandparent generation. Okay, let's go ahead to Mishnah 6. Look at that lined up. There we are. The daughter of a priest. Remember, the daughter of a priest has access to truma from birth, but loses it when she gets married. The daughter of a priest married to an Israelite may not partake of truma. If the Israelite died, and she has a son from him, she may not partake of truma as long as that son is alive. She is anchored to the Israelite child. If subsequently she married a Levite, she may partake of the tithe. If he died and she had a son from him, she may still partake of the tithe. This is all the mirror image, except we're beginning with a priestly daughter rather than with an Israelite daughter. If she subsequently married a priest, she may partake of truma, meaning she can go back into the priest. If the priest died and she had a son from him, she may partake of truma. If her son from the priest also died, she may not partake of truma, but she may partake of the tithe as she has a son from a Levite. So again, the access she has to this family fortune will vary depending upon who is alive and who isn't. If her son from the Levite died, she may no longer partake of the tithe. If her son from the Israelite died, she returns to her father's house, back to the beginning, and may once again partake of the truma. And with regard to this woman, it is stated from Leviticus 22, and she is returned unto her father's house as in her youth, she may eat of her father's bread. So she is allowed to have truma once again, having been reabsorbed, if you will, into the father's portion of the fortune. Questions, comments, make sense? This one is very much a continuation of the previous one, so hopefully it'll make sense. And if it doesn't, then we need to go back and do the other one. All right. Now we get into a new topic, but we got time to start it up. We're definitely not going to, I don't think we're going to get past Mishnah 1 of chapter 10, but I want to go ahead and start the topic because it is a big one. And it is the topic of what happens when the woman is widowed, but you're not 100% sure she's a widow. The classic example that we're going to use is when the husband has gone overseas and somebody says that he's dead. Right? It's not like they had, cameras showing the death, but we're going to get a witness. Okay, so what happens?
Could be also the same story with the widow of Ron Arad.
The widow of, I'm sorry, what?
Ron Arad, the pilot that was captured from
yes.
the first Lebanon war, that no one knows if he's alive, not. It's the same history.
Exactly right. So this in the modern world, unfortunately, the most common version of this is the case of somebody who's been captured or who has died in a natural disaster. After 9/11, there was a huge number of people that had to be examined, if you will, their status, to try and see what their position should be vis-a-vis the unwitnessed deaths that occurred during that time. But in this particular case, we are going to think that everything's okay, that we have a witness. And we're going to see how that plays out. So I should point out, in general, if the woman follows the proper procedure, she is allowed to remarry based upon the testimony of one person, an eyewitness, to the death of the husband overseas. This was instituted to make sure that women would not be left marooned when their husbands went off. So in general, one witness is sufficient. However, it is expected that the woman will not just say, oh, he's dead, all right, let's get married, but instead will continue the investigation and find more evidence corroboration, or at least have done additional due diligence before she gets remarried. That's going to be a little important for understanding later on, so I wanted to get that out of the way. So, with regard to a woman whose husband went overseas and witnesses came and they said to her, your husband is dead. And she married another man on the basis of the testimony. And afterwards, it's the soap opera, her husband came back from out of the country. She must leave both this man and that one, as they are both forbidden to her. She is not allowed to be continue to be married to the second husband, nor is she allowed to be married to the first husband. Instead, she requires a get, a bill of divorce from this one and that one. She gets 2 divorces. And furthermore, she has a claim to neither payment of her marriage contract, nor the profits of her property used by either of them, nor sustenance, nor the worn clothes she brought to the marriage. She has rights to these claims, neither against this man nor against that one. That is to say, she cannot collect these payments from either her first husband or her second husband. So again, the idea is that, yes, although theoretically one witness is sufficient, there is a necessity to go through further steps of clarification. And the understanding of the halakha is that she failed to do that in this case, that she raced to get remarried without finding additional clarification that indeed the husband was dead. So that is why the marriage, the second marriage, doesn't stand. And it's why the second marriage, having not been legitimate, invalidates the ketubah of the first marriage as well. Because after all, if the woman commits adultery, you're not required to pay her ketubah either. Intentional adultery. Here it is more accidental adultery.
Rabbi, what did it mean by profits? Is that the interest on her principal?
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Where did I leave off? And if she took any of these items from this man or from that one, meaning if one of them paid her the ketubah, she must return them to him. She is not allowed to keep them.
But what happened? They refuse to say, you know what, just take it.
Well, so this is always a question of how is it playing out in the community and in the court? So if everybody agrees that she is allowed to keep it, then yes, the court would be powerless to force it to be returned. On the other hand, if there is any doubt or question, then the court could seize the property and force it back, to the husband. Now, if he wants to turn around and give it to her as a gift, then yeah, you can never stop a person from giving a person a gift. But if it was given as a ketubah, or if it was given as compensation for the loss of the principal or things like that, and the husband says, oh, well, wait a minute, I didn't know that that wasn't the law, she is obligated to give it back. You can't say, well, he gave it to her, so it's hers now. It was given under error, and therefore it must be returned.
Rabbi.
Yes.
In the hypothetical situation, if she married the second husband and then divorced him and then found out about her first husband was alive, would she have to return the ketubah to the second husband?
Yes, she would, right? Because they were never considered to be properly married. I mean, it's retroactive, but yes, it was never considered to have been a proper marriage. And the first marriage was invalidated by the second. All right, let's go ahead and try and see if we can finish up the second half. Don't worry, we're not done with this topic. It's going to continue throughout chapter 10. And the offspring is a mamzer from this one and from that one. All right, now they're going to explain this. Her child from the second husband is a definite mamzer, as she was never divorced from her first husband, right? So that one's pretty clear. When she got married to number 2, she was still technically married to number 1. And that means that the children are the children of adultery. And the sages decreed that if she returned to her first husband after the second husband, a child born later from him is also a mamzer, right? So it's not saying that any children she had from the first husband before his death and before her remarriage are mamzerim. It is only saying that if she goes back to the first husband after his return, having had the problem explained and clarified, then the children are considered mamzer. Now, if the second husband officially divorces her before she returns, then the children are not considered mamzerim. They're still not allowed to live together, and he still has to send her off. But the children would not have the status of mamzer in that second case. This is talking about where she just says, oh, my first husband's back, see ya, and she goes back to the first husband. But if there is a divorce from the second one, the children do not get the stigma of being mamzerim, but the first marriage is not allowed to stand, and she has to be divorced from that one as well.
So there is no room for the first husband to remarry her?
No. Right. The remarriage rules are fairly strict. Once she has been with the other guy, then that means that she is prohibited from the husband. One of the things that's often swept under the rug in modern conversations about this is that if the woman has committed adultery, which technically is what happened here, even if it was accidental, but it was, I guess you would call it under the rabbinic rules, negligent adultery rather than purposeful, is once adultery has been committed, the husband doesn't have the choice to take her back. The husband is required to divorce her. Nowadays, I know that we err on the side of reconciliation, and we try to find ways to find a path for husband and wife to often reconcile if at all possible. But in rabbinic teachings and from the Torah itself, that's not really an option. And it's not just an option because the husband wouldn't let it. It's the community would not let the husband allow her to return. Now, did it happen? Of course it happened. Did it happen that the community would often not force a divorce? Of course, the community often didn't have the leverage to force a divorce. We see this in the prophet Hosea's life, where he actually married a woman that was knowingly unfaithful to him, and yet he remained faithful to her, paralleling the relationship of the Israelites to God. But that is not the official version of what should be done. Officially, he should divorce her because of the betrayal that has been committed. So it's more complicated, like I said, but that is the official position. You know what? We're going to go ahead and leave it there because we have a lot more rules about their relationship with her and what their status is. And a lot of them are going to take extra explanation because we haven't talked about them before. So we're going to leave it there with this horrible soap opera situation having happened. And there's not really going to be a happy ever after, guys. I'm sorry. Sometimes bad things can happen. Again, I want you to hold on to the idea that at least from the rabbinic perspective of the Talmud and Halakha, that this is only in a situation where there was more that could have been done to establish the true fate of the first husband. This is not meant to be if everything possible was done and some freak occurrence had happened. This is really meant to be a negligent remarriage rather than one that was done with all due diligence. But more on that next week. And I hope everybody remembers that tonight and tomorrow are Yom HaShoah. There are many interesting programs, both locally as well as nationally. Check out the Masorti movement in Israel. Check out the Rabbinical Assembly. Check out United Synagogue. Check out the local Holocaust Center. There are many things that are going on for Yom HaShoah so that we will not forget the catastrophe of the Holocaust, and we will be sure to make sure such things never happen again.
And we have also a program on Sunday from Yom HaShoah in our synagogue.
And yes, not on today, but on Sunday, we do have a Yom HaShoah adult education program trying to wrestle with the question of where was God during the Holocaust? And that is, I'm sure, going to be a great program. That is at 10 o'clock, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct. Perfect. And by the way, Rabbi, just before leaving, I found a rabbi in Israel to talk about transgenders and homosexuals.
Oh, great. So yeah, send me some information and
Yes.
that'd be great.
You know what? I will send you, because after that, I also contacted Rabbinical Assembly and they sent me 2 others names.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the Israel is less expensive. Okay. But I don't know the other one. But you know what? I will give you the 3 names because I don't know them.
Right.
And maybe, yes, you know, and you can tell me, you know what, Nathan, this is much better than the other ones. Okay. So I will send you the information now in an email.
Well, thank you. I look forward to seeing that and what program we can put together.
Perfect. And let me know which one recommend me. Okay.
Will do.
Thank you.
Be well,
Yevamot,
everyone, and
thank
take
you
care.
for the